Hey, this is Rob Emanuel, and I'm going to be doing a tutorial about using PAW, Phased Agent Workflow. It'll be sort of an edited live coding session where I'll actually use PAW to try to make a pull request on an open source project. So getting started, the first thing to do would be to go to Lossy Rob, Phased Agent Workflow, right? There's a quick start here that will show you how to install the VS Code extension. It's not in the marketplace yet, but you can go to the releases and then just download the latest release and install per the instructions. And then so I'll switch over to VS Code. I have pgvector checked out. And so just immediately I'm going to open up the command palette and I'm going to type PAW. And we can see that PAW has a get work status and new PAW workflow. Those are the two commands that you'll interact with, and it's all through the command palette. But before I start PAW, this is a new project for me. So I'm going to just ask agent mode like how to set up this development environment, just because I haven't used this, develop on this project yet. And while that's working, I'll switch over to this issue here on pgvector that has an example of what seems like a maybe medium complexity feature to add. And I don't know necessarily what it's asking for. I mean, it looks like there's some default settings that it wants to set on the index rather than the guck. And it seems pretty upvoted, so but pretty old. So let's see if we can use PAW to make some progress on this. And I haven't tried this, so I don't know that it's going to work, but we shall see. Great. And let's see. It's asking me to run things, but like, please run the make commands and set up the environment. Agent mode could just do it for me, so I don't need to figure out which commands to run. All right, I think we're ready. So now, let's start the PAW process after all that. Again, important to get the environment set up correctly. So I'm going to remove this part and just get the issue link and say PAW new PAW workflow. So I'm going to enter the issue or work item URL. So this could be a Azure DevOps work item or a GitHub issue. So like that, I'm just going to default the branch name so it'll figure it out for itself. Now the workflow mode selection, it lets you sort of choose how many stages you want to run. So the full workflow will run, creating a spec, doing implementation planning, the implementation docs and PR. Minimal will just avoid the spec. If there's a good enough issue or it's a small enough change, you don't need to write a spec sometimes. You just need something quick. And so there'll just be like a single phase implementation plan. I've got myself in trouble a little bit when I thought that it was like a pretty small change and just did minimal, but like I ended up adding phases to the implementation plan just because there were more changes than that were needed. So just watch out for that. And then custom is you can just provide instructions about what kind of stages you want to run, and it'll kind of just do your custom workflow based on the reasoning of the agents. So I'm going to go with full. And now there's a review strategy. So there's PRs and there's local. So for PRs, it'll actually push the sort of feature branch. And then for each of the planning stage, the implementation phases, the docs, it will create pull requests from a sort of branch off of your feature branch into your feature branch so that you can review code as GitHub pull requests, which is really useful. If you sort of have the repository that you can either you're working off of a fork of the main repository, or you don't mind a bunch of PRs for the incremental changes happening, I recommend using this. I use this a lot because I like to review code on GitHub rather than sort of locally. For this, actually, I'll keep it as PRs for this work, and I'll just work off of a fork. And then there's local, where it won't make a PR until the final PR, and you can just kind of like review things locally. But I'm going to go with PRs here. There's a handoff mode. Manual is where you actually say to go on to the next stage. There's semi-auto, which allows you to sort of skip having to explicitly say, hey, from implementation, go to the implementation reviewer, or from code research, go to implementation plan. It just automates some of the handoffs from the agents. And then in local review mode, there's full auto mode, which just tries to just go and do everything. You still have to click buttons, but it'll, for small changes, it kind of just does everything itself. So it's quite hands off, but I'd recommend just sticking with manual at first until you get used to the process. So what this does is kick off a prompt about how to start the PAW workflow, and the agent gets to work, right? While that's happening, I'm going to actually go and fork this project so that I can work off my fork. So it's creating my workflow context, which is a sort of top level file that defines, what the work title is, the sort of work ID, just all of the sort of parameters for PAW. This is happening because I haven't configured my Git credentials, or my Git email and name. So give me a second. Set. So when it's trying to do something that I don't want it to do, I'll just say skip, pause, and then say I set the configuration manually. Great, so it gives me the next steps. And now I can sort of continue to the specification stage. One edit that I'm actually just going to do right away for the oh, you know what? Actually, I'll just say origin will be my fork. So let me just change the origin remote quickly in Git. Actually, let me just ask it to do that. Please change Git remote origin to my fork, as will work off my fork instead of upstream. And then have the current origin as upstream. So I'm going to say spec. Proceed to spec. And what that's going to do is it's going to call a tool that's actually going to create a new chat and set up the spec agent to do my work. This happens when it goes to start a new chat. It says, "Do you want to keep your edits?" So you usually just have to keep and continue. It'll start a new chat. All it needs to say to the spec agent is the work ID, and through that, it understands, the context from the workflow context. Like it retrieves the PAW context, which is a bunch of information about the PAW workflow that we're working on, any custom instructions that you've made for the agents, and then specific handoff instructions. It gets that up front. Every agent just gets that up front, so it kind of understands what we're working on. So right now it's getting the issue. All right, so right now it's creating a prompt that holds its sort of research questions. It wants to ask the spec researcher agent about how the system works today, or like currently before our changes, so that it can better understand the changes that need to be made. And so you can see the questions that it's going to be asking. There's an optional external or like additional context that you can add. The agent won't answer this for itself. This is things that you could, go put into, ChatGPT or Copilot or whatever, to go do some additional like external research. And it's optional, so it'll just, if you don't provide the answers, it'll just kind of go and use its best judgment. Right, it looks like it created a spec of its initial understanding. So I'll go ahead and run research and see how this goes. Usually it runs the research without creating the spec first, so we'll see how this goes. All right, so I completed the spec research document. I'll just say continue. And you'll notice that the agent's fetching the GitHub issue again, because this is a new agent. We cleared the context, so it sort of has to reload all of the important context, like the GitHub issue, every single time. Let's go ahead and look at the spec, do a little bit of review. So the spec will have a overview section, which sort of presents the narrative about what the work is, a set of objectives, which are again sort of like narrative about what we're trying to accomplish, and then it'll move into user scenarios and testing, where there's a set of user stories that sort of define exactly kind of like the acceptance criteria, like what do we actually need to build from a requirement standpoint. So I usually will at least read the overview, like the narrative components, and if I see anything off, then I'll dig into questions. But the agents usually are good at syncing the narrative and the sort of functional requirements. But certainly, if I'm more familiar with the changes, this is a part where I really take a lot of time to review the spec, make sure it's right. The more effort you put into making sure the plan is good, that both the specification and the implementation plan, the better time you're gonna have. Like the better chance the agents are gonna do exactly what you want. Cool. Sounds reasonable to me. And you'll notice that this is not talking about the technical changes where we need to make all this happen. It's really at the behavioral level. The implementation plan dives into, okay, what do we need to change to accomplish the goals of the spec? Great. Well, let's move on to the planning phase. And so the first phase of the planning stage is code research. So before a plan is made, code research looks at the baseline of where how the code functions, especially in the areas that it determines will need to be changed, so that the implementation planner doesn't need to spend context and tokens and chat history doing all that searching and then writing a plan. It can sort of start from a well formatted, specifically constructed set of research about exactly where all the code it needs to consider is, and it can make the plan off of that. I recommend having the GitHub MCP server installed. Actually, it's required for the sort of PR setup and accessing any like non-public repositories. And it'll usually use the GitHub MCP server when it needs to, and if it sees that the GitHub CLI won't be able to accomplish its tasks. So let's go ahead and take a look at code research and what that looks like. You can see that this is much more technical about not just how it works, but where all of the actual code lives, including like files and line numbers. Interesting. It has some open questions that we might need to answer in order to effectively finish the project, but we'll see what the planner thinks. Implementation plans can get very large, and that can cause some failures when the model tries to generate very large documents. So it'll split it up into writing an outline and then writing the various phases. So that's why you see this to-do is actually this to-do list is actually longer than just like writing it. All right, so it's committing the planning artifacts and then creating a planning PR. So this is where it uses the GitHub MCP to actually create a planning branch off of my feature branch, and then create the PR. Oh yeah, the base branch doesn't exist. So these are one of the things that it just tries something and then figures out that it needs to push the original feature branch. So I can go to the pull request here. And here is the planning. You'll see the sort of PAW markings just to make it clear that this is sort of generated material, sort of AI disclosure. And here we have all of our spec research, code research, and implementation plan. So we already sort of looked at this locally. But again, if this was something where I know more about the code base and the changes to make, I will go over this. And for larger, especially like larger features where it might expose that I've maybe not thought it totally through, or I need to go back to the PM and say, hey, the spec is saying this thing, but we didn't make that choice. We need to make some decisions around this, right? It exposes a lot about how much you've actually defined what you're working on and what you want the agents to code. And if it's not well defined, or it's like defined incorrectly, or made some assumptions that are not correct, now is the time to change it. Fixing after the fact is just way harder, and usually it's better to just like go back to the planning phase and ask it to make new correct plans, instead of trying to get it to like fix its work, because the agents can kind of spin out. Great. I'm gonna say I'm just gonna merge this. So this merges it into my feature branch. And then we'll move forward with the implementation. All right, so here the implementer agent will create a phase branch, and then implement just a single phase of the implementation plan. Great, now the implementation is done, and the next step is to hand off to the implementation review agent. So I'll go ahead and do that. And this agent will just kind of check the implementation, make sure that it has proper documentation, if there's any code improvements that can be made, small refactors, it'll just go ahead and do that. Otherwise, it'll ask the implementation agent to make changes. But normally they agree with each other. And one technique I'll use is to have one agent do implementation, one model do implementation like Codex, and the other one do review, like a Claude Sonnet or Claude Opus now. That would require us generating prompt files and setting the model, which I'll maybe actually even go ahead and do. I could also switch the model. So for the next phase, let's have Codex do the coding. The implementation agent is also the one that pushes and makes the PR. So it'll open a pull request and also add a comment about its review of the code. So we can switch over to and so if I'm not going to be able to really know if these are good changes or not. But if I did have comments, I could just review this like a regular PR and say, this should be somewhere else. Right? And if I comment, and then I were to go and, yeah, just for fun, let's say address comments. Confuse the agent about why I would make that review comment, but it'll actually go ahead, check the PR for comments, and then hand back to the implementer. and it'll try to address my comment. Probably asking me what I mean. So it's really trying to address my comment. I'm gonna stop it. It wasn't real. So let me go ahead and delete this comment just to avoid any confusion in the future. And go ahead and merge this. So that'll merge it into my feature branch. Right. So I'm going to go back in history to the phase 1 implementation where it was asking me what I want to do. And I said address comments, but actually I'm going to change this to implement. Now, one of the unfortunate things that happens when you like click on a message and resend it is that it resets this agent. So you do have to make sure that you're on the right agent or else it won't know what to do. So instead of this, I'll say implement. So here it's saying that it's on phase 1 branch, and then it'll move on to phase 2. I have to make it better about switching branches and kind of cleaning up after a phase implementation, or else I just normally just do it manually. Right now it's kind of, I'm not sure why it's running tests. There's an issue to improve the git branching between stages and phases, so hopefully that'll be a little smoother soon. And so I'm going to run through the same process for each of the phases, and we'll come back when the implementation phases are completed. All right, and we're back. I just merged phase 5. So you can see there's no more open pull requests. We haven't made the final PR yet. I'll switch back over to this and just move on to the docs phase, right? So after all the implementation, phases are completed, there's a documentation phase, which will at least create a docs.md inside of the PAW work folder. That's sort of a very thorough treatment of the feature or the changes, how to manually test, sort of a user guide. And then it'll also look for other documentation in the project to understand like what it should update, and it's sort of instructed to try to match the existing project documentation. This is probably one of the areas that's least tested just because it needs to be tested across many different projects that have different like documentation practices. So if you find anything that it's not doing that it should, please let me know, open a issue on the PAW repository, or use PAW to contribute. You can see it's looking for the existing documentation style in the README and the changelog, so it'll go ahead and update those artifacts. Great. So documentation. So there was just a couple additions to the README. The README is pretty long, and it did a good job of matching. I can't actually find it. Oh, here it is. Just matching the documentation style where it's pretty terse, just mentioning the options in this list. Change log, and you can see that the docs.md is a much longer treatment of this feature. Which just lives in the PAW work directory, so it can be referenced if needed, or provides more consolidated or like a more thorough documentation if you need something to update MS Docs or other documentation places. Great, so I'm gonna go ahead and merge this and then see what next steps. Next steps is the PR. Very cool. Let's go for it. And the PR agent will sort of do some flight checks about making sure that everything is done and everything's completed and all the artifacts are there. So you'll do it. So you do a set of work to just do some validation. So this is going to make the PR against my fork. This is an improvement I'll have to make when there is sort of an upstream target. But for now, I'll just do this and then I'll change the base manually on the PR UI. So we can look at this. So this is the final PR. Talks about closing this issue. And then one thing that I'll do generally is for an open source project that isn't using PAW, they probably don't want the PAW artifacts in here, although they are like very useful to see. So what I'll do is I'll ask the agent, please modify the PR description so that the links to the artifacts apply to a specific commit. I'm going to add a commit. You know what? I'm going to use voice here because do me a favor and modify the PR description so that the PAW artifacts that are linked to it are for a specific commit. I'm going to add a commit that actually deletes the PAW work directory just because the upstream open source project doesn't use PAW, so I don't want to put PAW documentation into their repository if they don't want it. But I want the PR description to be able to link back to my fork and the actual artifacts. So just modify the PR description to fit that. And I'll often use voice to chat with the agent if I'm kind of stream of conscious talking at it, or even just open up a markdown file and talk at the voice dictation for a while and provide that as context. All right. So this should now be updated to point to a specific commit. It is. Great. And now I'll just say, go ahead and delete the PAW directory, add a commit saying that we're removing the PAW directory as the upstream project doesn't use PAW, and then push that to the feature branch. Great. And so now the files changed are just the code files and the documentation adds for the main documentation. However, these artifacts still link. And then, so yeah, as a next step, I'm going to go ahead and oh, that's unfortunate. I'm pretty sure I've done that before. I'm just gonna ask it to do it. This PR was made against the origin remote. I want it against upstream. So it'll just make a new one. All right, so that closed this one. Now if we go back here, we can see that I have a PR up on pgvector that I believe solves the issue. With a really good description, a lot of information in the commits. We have all of our documentation. If people want to, the reviewer can then now look at this and really see what the implementation holds, and then read review the code. So if the maintainer comes and comments on the code, I can then ask the implementation agent to go fetch the review comments and then update the pull request. So yeah, that's the process. And I was able to create hopefully solve what seems like an important issue. There's, let's see, this issue's pretty old, but it's got 14 hearts. It's got a number of people kind of saying, hey, we really need this. We keep getting reports of the problem caused by the lack of this feature. So I'll see how the maintainer feels about it, but could be a solid contribution that I did in, I would say, a couple hours, starting from scratch of like cloning the repository and figuring out how to build the project to making a solid contribution. So hopefully this helped you like orient to, the one I didn't command I didn't actually show, I meant to, is this get work status. Well, there's no longer a PAW directory, so because I deleted the PAW directory, it can't actually give me the status. But anyway, I would probably rehydrate the PAW directory and then continue with the PAW process if I get feedback. Or maybe I should have just kept it around. But I don't know. So some people might have feelings about like the PAW directory being as part of the pull request. But it is great context, and I recommend that you commit it to your repositories if you own the repo and are comfortable with that. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful. Cheers.